an unexpected guest. His parents-in-law's place was simple and small, an indicator of how little money they had. Manuel was already 62 years old and was waiting with some anxiety for a chance to retire. He had worked all his life in several demanding jobs, especially as a construction worker. In the last 20 years he had specialized as an electrician and traveled the country from north to south, but he did not always declare his earnings properly, even going as far as working illegally for a while. Moreover, he did several odd jobs in Barrancos. Now he was old, and after a small work accident in one of these odd jobs, he had been forced to quit taking on these jobs, and he remained at home, without retirement, with poor health, barely making a living from some other jobs he could do, like selling vegetables and fruits that he planted in his garden. Maria, who was 5 years younger than Manuel, had always lived in Barrancos, always looking after the house, and while her husband walked across the country in work, she looked after their daughter, the garden and the domestic animals they had. She gained some money by looking after the elderly. Once she even baked desserts for a restaurant in the village, but the restaurant closed after a while and the little family business disappeared. The house was old. It had been passed down to Maria by her mother. It only had 2 bedrooms, one small kitchen, and a living room at the entrance of the house where the family met, which was its larger room. The original bathroom was in the backyard, an outhouse, but Manuel built another one inside. Recently, Gustavo's parents-in-law wanted to increase the house, to make one more bedroom for their grandchildren. Since they had space in the backyard, they took the chance to start the work, but when the walls were already raised, the city hall put a stop to it since Manuel had not asked for the city hall's permit. Furious, he had insulted the inspectors who had given him the notice, while his wife, more collected, advised him to pay something to the inspectors so that they would look the other way, but Manuel refused to do it vehemently. That is how, while the bedroom still awaited a green light, Gustavo and Marta slept with the children in the same bedroom. Marta and Gustavo slept in a single extra-long bed, still from the time when Marta was single. It was actually a bit small for them. At the feet of the bed, there was another bed, where Alice and Diogo slept. Gustavo liked this situation for several reasons. First of all, because it was a nice change. It even seemed like they were camping, the 4 of them sharing a small room, which always led to some playtime with the kids and some laughter before bedtime. Secondly, since he was so close to Marta, he enjoyed feeling and touching his wife's body. She, in turn, also liked to feel his hands caressing her body, as well as Gustavo's erection between her legs. In the morning, after breakfast, Marta and Maria decided to go to downtown to buy some things. Manuel decided to go to the backyard to water some tomatoes and cabbages he had planted, while Diogo and Alice ate slowly and saw cartoons on TV. Gustavo, looking at the scene, decided to go ahead and do some running through the fields. He would rather ride his bicycle, but as he had not brought it, he decided to run. After his usual sit-ups and push-ups, he went out and ran for about 35 minutes, relatively less than usual, but he did not want to get too tired. Besides, he did not know the place that well, and he was not fond of the idea of some angry dog running after him. As he went back home, he met Marta's cousin. He even thought of stopping to greet her, but he didn't want to lose his rhythm, so he only said, "Good morning," as she raised her hand and said, "Have you seen that moon thing yet?" Gustavo thought he had not understood her words. That moon thing. He thought that Marta's cousin was a card short of a full deck, just like half of the local population. When he got home, he found it odd to find his father-in-law in front of the TV instead of his kids. Instead of cartoons, the channel was some breaking news. Unidentified object parked on the moon was in large letter on the screen, while it gave static images of what looked like a kind of green building with legs on the moon. The journalist talked about this carefully, repeating himself often and showing he had little information on the subject. Gustavo was perplexed, and it began dawning on him that he was before an historic moment for humanity. A craft or unknown object was on the moon. It was official. Automatically, he recalled something similar he had lived upon September 11, 2001, when he was in Hamburg, Germany, with Eva, his ex-girlfriend. He felt the former company was actually more pleasant than this, his father-in-law. With Manuel's permission, he changed channels to check other sources of information, but they all said the same and they all showed the same images. Manuel decided to pay the subject little importance and went to see the kids play. Gustavo thought it wasn't much of a surprising attitude coming from such a basic and simple person like Manuel, and decided to take a quick shower. As he took his shower, he thought of what that could be. Could it actually be an alien craft? Or maybe some country had sent a craft to the moon claiming the territory as its. Or maybe it was some American maneuver to show its technological power. He thought how funny and ridiculous it would be if Portugal claimed the moon as its territory. He let out a big laughter. It would be a return to the grandeur of the discoveries Portugal did overseas during the 15th and 16th centuries. But unfortunately, Portugal was but a small and insignificant country, governed by incompetent people for over 20 years. When he finished getting dressed, the women had already returned with their shopping done and were ready to take care of lunch. As Gustavo expected, the two of them did not make any comment on that historic happening. Since there was no news, Gustavo met up with his children, who played in the backyard throwing stones at a small and nearly dry well that Manuel had abandoned. When the women called everyone for lunch, Gustavo was already very hungry and curious to know if there had been any progress on the subject of the flying object. He imagined that the internet would be bustling with all sorts of fantastic theories about the subject, and felt like forgetting about his family and indulging himself in all kinds of theories there could be. Unfortunately, for him, there weren't any news on TV concerning the unidentified object on the moon, and so far, no country had made any comment about it. "What do you make of it?" asked Gustavo, hoping to create an interesting discussion on the subject. "American trash," Marta said without any passion about the subject. "You'll see. It's likely a publicity stunt for some movie or some other crap the Americans want to sell." Gustavo was disheartened with that answer, and with the thought that it could actually be some publicity stunt by the Americans. Maria and the kids had hardly realized what was happening, and Manuel was quiet, as he often was, without showing much interest in what was on TV. It was a shame he was not at home, where his parents would certainly be much more interested in it, and would be sure to have some theories of their own. On TV, they were already asking people on the street what they thought on the subject. Portuguese journalism was painfully depressing, Gustavo thought. They ask just about anyone what they think, and they always choose the most stupid and illiterate people who hardly know how to speak Portuguese correctly. But that's how the average national TV news works. They always have to find a way to stretch the news in order to fill in the half an hour allocated to the news. After lunch, his cell phone rang. It was Norton, his friend from Lentisque. Gustavo's mood immediately brightened up when he saw who it was. He promptly excused himself to answer his phone outside. "How's it going, you nutjob? I already know why you're calling," Gustavo said without containing a brief and joyful laughter. "This is the end, my only friend, the end," Norton sang, trying to mimic the Doors' mythical vocalist. "They've already arrived, dude." "Are you sure?" "Of course, it seems so obvious to me that I'm already putting together a survival manual." He said it in such an adamant way that Gustavo was left wondering whether this was actually that serious or not. "You see, Gustavo, I was looking at some pages on the internet, and this is looking really bad. From some reference pictures, we can confirm that there is no technology on our planet like that. Besides, the craft's design is completely unusual, and that alone is huge." "Maybe it could be North Korean or Chinese," said Gustavo without much conviction. "You're crazy. They can't do anything like that. You'll see, no one will say a thing for now. Tomorrow maybe, due to the media's pressure, the leaders from the main countries will have to step up and speak. Then you'll see they will confirm that it is not man-made. So we'll have to ask ourselves two questions: have they come in peace? Or have they come to kill us?" That afternoon they arranged to go to eat some tapas in Spain and do some kind of light dinner that would please everyone, but it was still early. Gustavo didn't resist, and turned on his laptop and began to browse the internet in search of more information and theories, but it was not an easy task, since his kids wanted his attention and also wanted to see videos and cartoons on the computer. Still, he was scratching that itch, and during the afternoon he talked to one more friend. He called Annabella, an old friend from high school, from the time when Gustavo had joined the school paper, and from when he had met many of his current friends back in his homeland, Agualva Casum. His friendship with Annabella proved that a boy and a girl could actually be just friends. There had never been anything between them for several reasons, but above all, because they were too similar. "So Bella, you're freaking out, aren't you?" "Absolutely, this is too much, what do you think?" "I think it's not human." "Are you sure, Gus?" His friends from Casum called him Gus. "I don't know. It seems to me that we may be before a new discoveries era. And that's from North Korea." "You're going crazy. Those guys are starving, they don't even have the means to launch a proper missile." "If it's not them, it's the Chinese. I'm telling you, it's a new age, Gus. They're looking for minerals or other power sources, and this is the first step. Moreover, don't you try to tell me that it's aliens. What would they come here for? We're still a backwards planet with huge differences amongst ourselves. We aren't prepared to receive anybody yet." Changing subjects, when are you coming here? "I'm taking the kids to my parents tomorrow. They are on vacations. I'm in Barrancos right now. I've come to pick them up." "Wow, Barrancos, how cool. You must be having a lot of fun there," she said in an ironic manner. "Let me tell, this moon thing has made time fly curiously. Look, I will be spending next weekend there. How about we make time for a coffee together?" "It sounds like a very good idea, my friend, but no children, right?" "What? Don't tell me that you don't like to be with your nephews. They don't stop asking about you. Not to mention, you have to start thinking about it, you're turning 40 soon." "Don't be rude, I'm still too far from being 40 years old." "Well, Annabella," Gustavo interrupted. "I've already arranged with the family to go to Spain to eat some tapas." He said this with a forced and ridiculous Spanish accent. "Vale, amigo." Annabella followed him. "In that case, we'll see each other next week. I will arrange with everyone here, and I'll keep in touch." "Okay, if I'm lucky, my parents will stay with the kids and we may all go drink some beers." Gus was looking forward to the next weekend, as it would certainly be much more interesting than the current one. He felt blessed for having friends he considered cultured, people who read books, who liked independent and European movies, and were up to date about the current political situation. Marta did not share the same opinion. As far as she was concerned, Gustavo's friends were some kind of pseudo-intellectuals who spent their nights drinking, smoking, and talking about silly things, about slow and boring movies, and about politicians nobody had heard of. She felt an authentic ignorant around them, and felt like they thought her to be a dizzy woman and a lowly peasant that should not be there. Lately, she had gotten into the habit of always finding an excuse to dodge such meetings. As the afternoon came to an end, the family headed to Oliva da Fuente, a small Spanish village with roughly 5,000 inhabitants and with large cafes and taverns. Gustavo was curious to know how they were facing that morning's bombastic news, but he found the taverns to be as they always were, a lot of people along the counter and quite noisy. Moreover, he thought the Spanish people spoke pretty loudly, even exaggeratedly so. That day, it wasn't any different, but they kept showing the unidentified object on TV, and they were talking about the subject. Unfortunately, Gustavo was not as good with languages as he was with numbers, and barely understood a thing of Spanish. His kids enjoyed the atmosphere. They always chose some large tortilla and sat between their parents so they would help them. Gustavo loved to see his children happy, and also felt glad for being with them. That night, before going to sleep, he looked at the sky in search of the moon, but there were too many clouds and he couldn't see anything. He took one last look through the internet to know if there were any news on the subject, but he only found that some European leaders didn't quite know the origin of the object, reinforcing the possibility of it being extraterrestrial. The next morning there were only a few news relating to the lunar subject, and Gustavo packed his kids' clothes. The first week of Easter vacations was over, and the last week was about to begin, but this time they would spend it with their paternal grandparents in Kassam. He had planned that, in the middle of the afternoon, they would depart to Kassam to take the children. Gustavo and Marta would spend the night there, since they had to both return to São João Montes on Monday. Fortunately, he managed to find some time at the end of the afternoon to meet up with his friend Raul for a beer and some chat while they watched a soccer match. The hours spent in that house seemed to drag on. He could not do anything else besides looking after the kids, watching TV or surfing the web a little, and he was tired of his parents-in-law's company, who were truly uninteresting people in his eyes. That is why he felt at ease as soon as he sat down behind the steering wheel to leave that place. He played some movie for his kids in the back seats of the car to keep them entertained during the trip. In the meantime, he could concentrate on the road and on his own thoughts. He did not intend to talk to Marta, and he hoped she wouldn't tell him her cousin's gossips because he had no interest in the subject. As he drove, he remembered the first time he saw the strange craft on the moon, and he wondered where Eva was and what she would think about the subject. Gustavo had first met Eva in Amsterdam, in the summer of 2000, when he and other two friends from college had gone on an interrail through the north of Europe, with little money, but with plenty of will to discover new places. He had met Eva in a bar close to the hostel where the three friends were staying. Eva had a Scandinavian look, tall, a little pudgy, blue eyes, blonde, almost white, and very straight hair, fair skin, but her cheeks had a slightly pinkish tone. No doubt she was attractive, and Gustavo, who had seen her leave the hostel, decided to start a conversation with her over the counter when they were asking for a beer. Eva liked his courage to approach her, and felt attracted by Gustavo's tan skin, which complemented his greenish-blue eyes. They spent the night talking and drinking, and ended up kissing in some other bar. Gustavo decided to remain in Amsterdam, while his friends kept on the trip to Copenhagen, and Eva left aside her friends too, and decided to travel to Belgium with that Portuguese man. They fell in love, and even though Eva was 2 years younger than Gustavo, she had more experience from past relationships. As he was concerned, Eva was his first serious girlfriend. He had already had casual relation with other girls, but with Eva, for the first time, he knew what falling in love was. Eva too shared this love, and they were willing to make any sacrifice to be together. Thus, when the summer finished, Gustavo returned to college and asked to take up an Erasmus grant in Germany, but it would only be possible in February-March 2001. Therefore, they spent a long winter talking through the internet at night, and making all sorts of plans for when Gustavo went to Hamburg for the Erasmus grant. In November, Eva saved up some money and traveled to Lisbon to be with Gustavo. His very liberal parents let the foreigner girl sleep in the same bed as their son and were always kind to her. Eva loved Lisbon and Gustavo's friends. He was already learning German at a language school, but without much success. In February, Gustavo traveled to Hamburg, Eva's homeland. They lived months of love, parties, marijuana, alcohol, sex, and discussions. Little by little, Gustavo realized that Eva was very egocentric and played the victim constantly. Eva, on the other hand, began realizing that Gustavo was selfish and an incurably manipulative man. Still, they stayed together until the end of September 2001, at which point Gustavo had to go back to Portugal. At the airport, Eva decided to break up with him, saying she could not stand the distance anymore. Gustavo cried without reserves before her but still stood proud. He asked for nothing more than a warm hug, and then he headed off to the airplane that awaited him without looking back a single time. Eva lamented his departure, and ever since she wondered several times if she had not made a mistake. They restarted talking sporadically through social networks. In less than 1 year, Gustavo met Marta and fell in love again. Now Eva, like him, was married and had kids. Gustavo attentively followed the few news he got about her. She was logically older and fatter, but she still had a beautiful face. He still longed for the day she would get divorced from her husband and tell him he was the love of her life. When Marta saw her husband concentrating so hard on the steering wheel, she was afraid he could fall asleep, and as such she began talking about a dish she had learned from her mother that weekend. Gustavo did not pay her any attention and thought of the possibility of returning to Eva and leaving Marta. The idea pleased him, but he thought of his children and believed he would never abandon the two beings he loved the most in the world. He had committed many mistakes in his life, he had failed in many aspects, but he wanted to be a good father, and the best thing for his kids was to be close to their mother, even if this meant he had to spend the life with someone so futile like Marta. Gustavo asked his wife if she would be upset if he went for a beer with Raúl before dinner. Marta did not like the idea. Having to be alone with the kids and her parents-in-law didn't please her that much, but Gustavo had behaved so well in Barrancos that she was not able to deny his request. Gustavo's parents were actually different from Marta's. Their names were Antonia and Joaquim. She was from Lisbon and she said it proudly. His parents and grandparents had lived in Castelo in downtown Lisbon. She was now 70 years old and had retired. She had been a nurse for over 30 years in the hospital of DICTATOR in Lisbon. Joaquim, with the same age, had worked in the postal service in many positions, from a mail carrier up to division head. He was from a small village in Portugal, and had come to Lisbon when he was only 20 years old. They were both left-wing sympathizers but practicing Catholic and enjoyed reading and traveling, although lately Joaquim's health was worsening and their trips were shorter and shorter, especially to spas. They were very fond of Marta and treated her like a daughter. Marta also felt comfortable and liked to be able to rest on the couch without being worried about food. When they arrived at Casum, Gustavo helped putting up the bags, kissed his parents and immediately went out to the cafe to meet Raúl. He was already waiting for Gustavo and was drinking his second beer when he arrived. They greeted with a hug and immediately asked for one more beer. The owner of the cafe, who knew Gustavo since he was a kid, was over the moon when he saw him. "So you came to see the poor?" said the old man of the bar with a slight smile. "Poor? I'm the poor here," Gustavo answered, trying to be kind. After the usual questions about the family, Gustavo got to finally be alone with Raúl, who was watching the Premier League match on TV. "What do you think about that, Raúl? What a bomb, isn't it? Only Americans trying to advertise for some movie," Raúl answered with some despises for the subject. "You're crazy. Just now, on the way, I heard on the radio that Israel's prime minister said that it could hardly be of human origin." "Are you serious? I don't believe it. Maybe that's some attention-drawing story of the Americans. I'm telling you." Raúl was Gustavo's best friend. They had met in high school. They both had been part of the school paper. Raúl was 2 years younger than Gustavo and was still single. He lived with his parents and worked for a mattress factory in the Casum industrial district. He was very relaxed. He had not had a girlfriend for some time and didn't seem worried about it. He loved soccer, beer, and the company of his friends. Like a large number of people from Casum, Raúl was mulatto. His father was from Cape Verde and his mother from Coimbra. He liked reggae and had a Jamaican style of dressing, but curiously he was one of the few friends of Gustavo who voted right-wing. During the afternoon they drank a few more beers and talked about soccer and UFOs, until Marta called Gustavo to warn him that dinner was ready. He left the cafe a little affected by the beer, and went to his parents' house that was nearby. When he got home, he saw they were all watching TV. He approached quickly and saw that the North American president was speaking. He said what he had suspected. The USA did not know the origin of that object, but they were willing to discuss the subject with anyone. "That's it, this is official then. That is actually about aliens, there's no doubt." There are still the Chinese, Koreans, and Russians left to speak. Yeah, and you think the US don't know whether that is Chinese or Russian? It's clear we are before the first global alien contact. So what should we expect now? Antonia asked with a worried tone. Now? We need to know if they come in peace or not, Gustavo said brightly. On TV it was becoming clear that they were before an encounter with beings from other planets, and the question now was, did they come in peace? How would humanity react to this uncertainty? Who would lead mankind? Moreover, who would be our spokesperson? How would it all reflect on the stock exchange and in our everyday lives? All these questions followed Gustavo when he went to sleep. He was tired and wanted to sleep right away. Alice had a fever, and Marta had decided to sleep with their daughter in Gustavo's old bedroom, which he had shared with his brother, and Gustavo was going to sleep on the sofa with Diogo. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, an enormous living room with a balcony, a spacious kitchen, and 2 bathrooms. It showed just how much better Gustavo's parents were doing compared to their counterparts from Alentejo. As expected, Gustavo fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, he woke up suddenly because of a nightmare that had seemed to be real. He dreamt that he was in the car with his family and that Cassim, Lisbon, and Vila Franca de Xiro were on fire. Then he drove at high speed and managed to escape from the fire. While he drove, the fire chased after him and burned down houses and cities. His wife and kids cried for him to drive faster. Finally, he got to Lentisque, his father's village, where there was no fire. Everything was calm and green, and the 4 of them got out of the car and embraced the happiness of being alive. Suddenly, they spotted an airplane in the sky, and in a matter of seconds it began to burn and crashing down towards them, who, without time to react, watched as that object approached at high speed. Gustavo woke up in shock from this nightmare and decided to stand up to urinate and drink some water. Wide awake, he went to the living room's balcony that had a magnificent view of the Sintras Mountains, with Peña Palace in the background. That night he could see the moon above the mountains. The image was powerful and brutal. He could also distinguish a small green spot on the moon, and a quick and fleeting shooting star flew between the moon and the mountains. Then he sat in a chair to contemplate this landscape as he tried to recall all the details of the dream. Later, Gustavo would say that dream was an omen from the gods to him.